Welcome to The Explainer. So today, we're diving into a story that absolutely flips the script on how we talk about illness. We're unpacking John Green's incredible novel, The Fault in Our Stars. Now, if you're tuning in expecting some standard, tear-jerking tragedy full of brave, angelic patients, well, you are definitely in the wrong place. Instead, we're going to look at a brilliant, razor-sharp, and super philosophical subversion of literally every illness trope you can think of. Okay, let's dive into this. Depression is not a side effect of cancer. Depression is a side effect of dying. Man, that thought right there drops us straight into the raw, cynical, and honestly just incredibly sharp mind of our 16-year-old protagonist, Hazel Grace Lancaster. She is not here to sugarcoat her reality just to make healthy people feel more comfortable, you know? In her worldview, all those glossy medical pamphlets have it completely backward. She gets at the profound sadness she's feeling. It isn't just some clinical symptom of her disease. It's the crushing existential weight of facing her own mortality at such a young age. To really wrap our heads around this dynamic, this explainer is going to unpack the first 5 chapters of the source material. We're going to look really closely at how these young characters use biting wit, dark humor, and some surprisingly deep philosophy as their main coping mechanisms. It's how they deal with a reality that is, quite frankly, fundamentally unfair. And you know, a huge part of why this works so well comes down to the author, John Green. He has this remarkable ability to craft a narrative that deeply respects the messy, completely unglamorous reality of human pain. He just flat out refuses to resort to the cliches we almost always see in stories about sick kids. Instead, he gives his characters real agency, intense intelligence, and honestly, a whole lot of edge. So, let's get into our first major theme. Section 1, subverting the cancer story. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it visually breaks down Hazel's medical journey. From the very first page, she completely rejects that traditional heroic narrative that society loves to force onto sick kids. You know, the whole idea that they're warriors in a battle, they just need to fight hard enough to win. We see this through what people often call the medical miracle, but Hazel reframes it through her actual daily reality. Diagnosed at 13 with stage 4 thyroid cancer, she nearly drowns in her own fluid in the ICU at 14. Then comes the quote-unquote miracle. An experimental drug called phalanxivore actually shrinks her tumors. But here's the catch. It's not a cure. It's just a delay. Now she's 16, she's surviving indefinitely on drizzled oxygen, and she has to drag around a green oxygen tank she literally named Philip everywhere she goes. You can just feel her exhaustion. She's hyper-aware that she's basically just living on purchased time. And honestly, that exhaustion is totally amplified by the world around her. Society desperately wants the cancer story to be inspiring, right? Like those saccharine, needle-pointed pillows Hazel sees at a boy's house that say things like, good friends are hard to find and impossible to forget. But her grounded reality, it's sitting in the depressing basement of a cross-shaped church, right where the two boards meet, a spot the support group leader relentlessly refers to as the literal heart of Jesus. It's this isolating place where a rotating cast of kids quietly evaluate their odds of outliving the person sitting next to them. They're literally suffocating from their failing bodies while being told to live their best life today. Talk about a massive disconnect. Which brings us to section 2, the fear of oblivion. This fear really takes center stage when a boy named Augustus Waters shows up at the support group. He spends the session staring relentlessly at Hazel with these striking blue eyes, and then announces to the entire room that his greatest fear is oblivion. Now Hazel, who usually keeps to herself, delivers this absolute mic drop of a response. There will come a time when all of us are dead. There will be no one left to remember Aristotle or Cleopatra, let alone you. Boom. She bluntly reminds him that human oblivion is completely inevitable. The sun will collapse, humanity will end, and everyone will be forgotten. It is incredibly stark, brutal honesty. But rather than being put off by it, Augustus is instantly captivated. His face breaks into this massive, genuine smile because he realizes, right then and there, she operates on the exact same intellectual frequency he does. And we very quickly learn why Augustus thinks the way he does. He shares a story about the day before his leg was amputated due to osteosarcoma. He was this great basketball player, just shooting free throws in the gym, but suddenly he found himself wondering why he was methodically tossing a spherical object through a toroidal object. I mean, he hit 80 free throws in a row, but he said he felt like a toddler putting a peg through a hole. Staring down his own mortality, the completely arbitrary rules of human achievements suddenly seemed totally absurd to him. And it's this exact shared philosophical worldview that instantly cements his bond with Hazel. All right, let's look at section 3, metaphors and meaning.
So think about this for a second. How do you actually live your life when you know everything is just absurd and fragile? Well, our characters do it by using literature, symbols, and metaphors as literal armor against their own mortality. And this leads to a wildly tense moment early in the story. Hazel is definitely charmed by Augustus, but right in front of her, a girl whose lungs barely function, remember, he pulls out a cigarette and pops it right between his lips. I mean, seriously, why would an intelligent cancer survivor deliberately place a known carcinogen into his mouth? Hazel is absolutely furious. She basically calls it a fatal flaw. And this brilliantly illustrates Augustus's overarching desire for control. He calmly explains, it's a metaphor, see. You put the killing thing right between your teeth, but you don't give it the power to do its killing. He tells her he's never actually lit one. Placing that unlit cigarette in his mouth is purely a symbol of power for him. He's holding the very thing that causes death, the very thing that causes cancer, right there between his teeth, but he is actively denying it the power to actually kill him. Sure, it's just an illusion of control, but you have to admit it's a deeply necessary one for someone whose body was essentially hijacked by a rogue cellular mutation. But Hazel, she is not one to just let things slide. She immediately critiques his little metaphor by throwing the word hamartia at him, which is the literary term for a fatal flaw. And what's just so fascinating here is that their entire flirtation is built on this sharp intellectual sparring. They aren't bonding over typical teenage stuff. They're connecting through a shared lexicon of literature, deep philosophy, and the literal mechanics of dying. Moving right along to Section 4, the distance of normalcy. You can really see just how alienating normal life has become for Hazel when she goes on a polite but completely exhausting mall trip with her healthy friend Caitlin. Don't get me wrong, Caitlin is lovely, but she is utterly consumed by shopping and what Hazel jokingly calls toe-specific dysmorphia, basically freaking out that her toes are too long. Contrast that draining experience with a profound, deep comfort Hazel finds when she hangs out with Augustus and their mutual friend Isaac. With them, there's this shared, unspoken understanding of the real stakes of life. They don't have to pretend, they don't have to fake being normal. And this desperate desire for truth is exactly why Hazel treats this highly obscure novel called An Imperial Affliction like it's her personal Bible. It's a story about a girl with cancer, but it totally refuses to be a typical cancer book. It doesn't have a neat, tidy ending. In fact, it ends literally mid-sentence, the implication being that the narrator just dies or becomes too sick to write. When Augustus reads it, he is absolutely furious at the lack of resolution. But for Hazel, it is perfect, because death doesn't offer neat endings. Life just stops. That book validates her reality in a way the healthy world completely fails to do. Let's move to and see how this builds into the emotional climax of our explainer. Section 5, Pain Demands to be Felt. We finally arrive at what we can call the night of the broken trophies. So Isaac has a recurrence of eye cancer, and his one remaining eye has to be surgically removed, which will leave him permanently blind. To make matters so much worse, right before the surgery, his girlfriend Monica dumps him. She breaks their sacred, oft-repeated promise of always, simply because she can't handle his impending blindness. Hazel gets a frantic call to come over to Augustus's basement, and it is just chaotic. Augustus is aggressively playing this violent video game, loudly sacrificing his character to save fictional school children. It's this frantic, pixelated distraction. But right beside him, Isaac is consumed by a very real, completely uncontrollable devastation. He's sobbing hysterically over being abandoned. Eventually, he grabs Augustus's old plastic basketball trophies and just starts violently smashing them to pieces all over the basement floor. As Isaac finally collapses, totally breathless and sweating on top of all those jagged plastic remnants, Augustus looks down at him and delivers this line. It's a quote pulled directly from Hazel's favorite book. That's the thing about pain. It demands to be felt. And wow, that right there, that is the absolute core thesis of the source material. You cannot outsmart suffering. You can't metaphor it away with a clever unlit cigarette. You can't distract yourself with video games, and you sure can't cover it up with needle-pointed pillows. The raw, messy, absolutely devastating reality of pain simply demands to be felt. Which leaves us with this final, lingering thought. If life, much like an imperial affliction, offers absolutely no clean resolutions, no guarantees of always, and definitely no neat little bows to tie up our suffering, how do we find meaning in the unwritten pages of our own stories? Do we just search for it in the quiet understanding of the people sitting beside us in the basement? It's a profound question that John Green masterfully leaves for all of us to grapple with.
Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this deep dive into the source material leaves you looking at the messy beauty of our world just a little bit differently.